I came home for Thanksgiving and discovered my husband had vanished, leaving me alone with his stepfather. The house smelled like the last week of summer. Peaches from the stand on Main Street, fading into something colder, almost metallic, that lived in the corners of an empty kitchen. There was no welcome light by the front door, no boot prints in the hallway, no wreath on the mantel. The thermostat blinked 62 degrees. My suitcase had barely hit the hall when I heard the slow, steady creak of the rocking chair on the porch and the soft clink of a glass. That sound should have been ordinary, familiar. It wasn't. On the kitchen table, under a newspaper that had been folded just so, there was a single, brisk note in Brady's handwriting. Gone on a cruise with my ex. You'll stay and take care of stepdad. He needs you. The handwriting itself looked casual, like a text given a body. I read it twice, then a third time, because the brain will sometimes demand repetition before acceptance. He had left instructions, as though he were arranging an errand. His words didn't ask. They dictated. The air in the kitchen felt thinner. I had driven 8 hours the day before, worked through a pile of emails, and for 2 months I had been folding money into an envelope for a down payment on the condo we'd promised each other. Now the envelope felt small and useless in my bag. The peach scent could not mask the metallic tang of shock. I called his number because people call their husbands in moments like this. The call went straight to voicemail with a photo of him, laughing, tilted towards someone who was not me. His outgoing message still used our inside joke about burning Thanksgiving rolls. The voicemail box had 2 new messages. One, a text from some co-worker I didn't know. Best vacay ever, thanks for everything. And another from a number labeled Hanny, work. A string of photos, Brady at the rail of a ship, champagne in hand, the wind making the cape of his jacket look cinematic. The caption read, Family Time. The timestamp said he had posted it 12 hours earlier. I dropped into a kitchen chair as if someone had cut the legs out from under me. The room tilted. He had used the word family. He had used the word time. The Instagram photos were ordinary. Blue water, white deck, skin sun-brightened. But the story they told was not. One image was of Brady, with his arm around a woman with a quick smile, and hair the exact shade of the barista at the cafe downtown. Another showed a bottle of champagne with the liner of our name-brand savings jar in the background, an ugly little detail that hummed like a short circuit. Then I logged into our banking app. I have never been prouder of a spreadsheet than I was of our little savings balance. For 2 years, I tracked every extra dollar, raffles, overtime, sold furniture, toward the condo deposit. The balance had been a small constellation of promises. The transaction history was a flat, brutal thing. 3 days ago, a wire transfer to Ocean Line Cruises for $42,300. $42,300. The memo field read, Deposit, Group Booking. My hands went cold. Not just that sinking private cold, but an animal, public one. The number blinked at me like a signal. That was the amount we had tucked away for our place. I stared at it until the digits blurred. I pressed back until the app cycled me to the joint account images. There, faint and ridiculous, was the check image I recognized from months ago. Our names printed, the handwriting I had traced while we argued about paint colors. On the back, someone had written, Ocean Line, 11 to 14. It felt like arson in slow motion, a long, deliberate burn through everything we'd been building. The house had never felt more empty. Brady, I called, though the house was already anti-coagulated against sound. The couch swallowed my voice. A shuffle came from the porch chair, a slow, propulsive breath. Victor, Brady's stepfather, stood in the doorway before I could decide whether to be angry, ashamed, or startled. He wore a cardigan that smelled faintly of lavender and cigarette smoke, his white hair combed back in a way that still suggested dignity. He was much smaller than I remembered, as if time had compacted him. "You're early," he said. His voice had a gravel I didn't like. It was not unkind. "Where is he?" I asked. The question came out sharp, silence again like a held bruise. "Honey, he left," Victor said. He made a motion toward the note with a hand that trembled more from age than nerves. He could not have been more plainly honest. He looked at me like someone who had expected me to understand something that, until that second, I had not. "He's on a cruise. He said he'd be back Sunday." "With his ex," I said. Saying it aloud gave it teeth. My chest filled with a pressure that felt like a too tight scarf. "He said I was to stay and care for stepdad." Victor's mouth tightened. He had read the note. "He did," he said. "He left that note on purpose." "On purpose?" My voice turned buttery with incredulity. "He took our down payment." "I saw the transfer on Tuesday," Victor said. "I know the bank. Mr. Collins was there. He's not happy. He said Brady was smiling like a man who'd been freed." Victor's eyes were steady. "Come, sit." He didn't try to make light of it. He didn't judge me for sitting down with the trembling dignity of someone who had been given instructions and had to obey them. On the table beside him in a neat pile were objects that did not fit the casualness of the note: a small bottle of port, 2 glasses, a folded packet of hospital appointment reminders, and an envelope with copies of pages I couldn't yet make sense of. The rocking chair continued its soft, measured back and forth, as though the world contained one reliable motion in a day otherwise invented by chaos. "What did you expect?" Victor asked, not unkindly. The question landed like rain on a tin roof. I realized then that this house was not just quiet. It was a repository of choices other people had made on my behalf without my consent. I am not by nature a person who collapses easily. I give shape to things with lists, with plans, with small assertive acts. A knot of rosemary on a napkin, a note in a calendar. But there are moments when plans are robbed. This felt like being pickpocketed in full daylight. "Where is he exactly?" I asked, more to place a pin on a map in my brain than because location would change the gravity. "On the Atlantic," Victor said. He nodded toward the photos on my phone. "I've seen them. He's laughing. He took the rent. He took the down payment. He left a note." The words felt too blunt to hold all the hurt inside them. I tried to imagine the cruise. Brady's laugh in the wind, celebratory champagne, a wharf full of cardigans and cameras. That image baked with a ferocity that made me want to scream. Victor reached out and set his hand on mine, which was absurd given that the man was an in-law, and I had never had a paternal warmth toward him. His palm was dry, and the skin mapped like a landscape. "Jade," he said softly, "sit. Before you do anything you can't undo." His request was oddly reasonable. There was a wisdom in his voice that did not fit the man who had been largely absent during the years he could have helped. He had aged like someone who had spent his resources on himself and on a muscle memory of self-possession. "Before you do anything you can't undo," he repeated, and there was a small plea in it. I sat. I called Brady. It rang past the recommendations in my head. Do not rage dial. Do not serpentine in your thoughts. Do not make public a wound that will need stitches. The call went to voicemail again. No reply. I left one, not a plea. Something contained. "You left me the note. We'll talk when you get back." My hands still shook. I pulled up his Instagram, hovering on the smiling photos like a child over a candy store window. Comments floated up from people I barely knew, people I had seen in passing at the office holiday party. The world had applauded his escape. The whole thing felt like a betrayal that had been applauded. It was then, while I sat in the sudden quiet with a shirt smelling faintly of peaches, that I noticed the envelope on the table had my name written on it in Victor's slow block print. I reached for it as if it were a lifeline. Inside was a shorter note in neat adult handwriting, a sentence and a key. The key, attached with a safety pin, was small in brass. "It is for the safety deposit," Victor said. "You can use it at the bank." "Why me?" I asked, because of course that was the question that throbbed like a pulsing bruise. "Why would he?" Victor lifted his chin, the faintest motion of defiance, like someone assembling himself against time. "Because he believes you will stay. Because he thinks the house will be easier to take if there's someone here. Because he thought leaving you with me would be punishment." The word rolled between us like a pebble. Punishment. For what? For being, perhaps, the ordinary kind of woman who once trusted her partner. For being the convenient presence in a room that needed to witness an older man's decline. "He left a note," I said mechanically, tasting the syllables. "He chose a vacation instead of—" "Care," Victor finished. "Yes." There was more in his expression than resentment. It was a steadier calculation. He was not a man easily surprised by cruelty. He had in many ways played a role in its composition. Yet the thing that made the chair creak was not the note, but the revelation of a deeper wound. He slid a thin folder across the table. The action was small, ordinary, but the contents felt dangerous in their ordinariness. "You should see this," he said. "I'm not asking for pity. I'm asking for help. I did not want help, and yet I wanted it with an animal kind of hunger." The folder was labeled with dates that stretched back months. Inside were bank statements, dated envelopes, check images with signatures, and a ledger of withdrawals. There were also what looked like hospital appointment slips, and a letter from an oncologist's office with dates and a name, Dr. Lang, I read, and a sentence that read, "Diagnosed, stage," and then something that my brain had trouble holding. The word terminal arrived like a bleeding headline. It did not come with diagrams or promises, only the starkness of a label. "Victor?" My throat closed. There was a fluttery, private panic that is impossible to explain without tears. The sudden realization that the person before you is not invincible and that their time might be short. It compacts the world into a handful of urgent truths. "I didn't want to tell you," Victor said. "Not at first. I thought Brady would—" He stopped and the sentence curled inward like smoke. "He thought this would be an opportunity. He took money. He let things go. He assumed I would be easy to forget." I looked at the list of withdrawals. Several items were small and banal. Pharmacy charges, grocery cards. But interspersed were lines that read like theft in polite clothing. Cash withdrawals. Transfers to accounts I did not recognize. Dates that coincided with long weekends when Brady had reason to be elsewhere. Annual dental bills paid by someone else. A check written to Elaine for assistance. A neat euphemism that, in context, read as bribery. "How long have you known?" I asked. My voice had that brittle edge only fear can give. "A few months," he said. "The diagnosis was in September. The money transfers, I've kept track since July. I thought I could manage it quietly. I thought I could keep my dignity without bringing you in. But then—" He shifted in his seat, the room marking the transition like an exhale. "Then I realized I might not have the time I need to put things in order myself." There was a metal to his words that made me ache. He wasn't pleading that he be kept comfortable. He was worried that when he was gone, those who claimed family would do exactly as Brady had already shown them capable of doing, taking, spending, erasing. He knew the difference between being loved and being convenient. He had been convenient for years. "What do you want me to do?" The question escaped me before I could frame it with whatever moral scaffolding might have made it pleasant. I found myself unaccustomed to the sudden role of being asked to be a guardian of legacy. He folded his hands. "I want someone who will listen. Someone who isn't blinded by the idea of marriage or of loyalty to the person who abandoned another human being in their hour of need." "Are you asking me to—" He shook his head faintly. "No, not to do anything immoral. I will not ask that of you. I ask you to stay, to help me make sense of what is here, to be someone who knows, who can testify to what you have seen. I have kept records. I have letters. I have neighbors who will say what they've witnessed. I have Mr. Collins's card. I have Patricia's. He named her in a way that made it clear he had thought the strange arithmetic of legality through. A lawyer, I trust. At the name, something in my chest constricted. Patricia, the idea of approaching an attorney felt like stepping across an invisible line into a grown-up world where people are judged by documents and signatures rather than by promises. The folder on the table had an index. Bank statements, July, November, payment receipts, various photos dated, witness notes, Mrs. Peterson, mailbox video, medical, diagnosis and notes. Mailbox video? I asked, because the phrase prickled. It hinted at surveillance, at someone chronicling with a patient eye the small humiliations of old age. Who recorded that? Victor did not elaborate. He wouldn't have to. The record had weight regardless of how it had been acquired. There was enough there to suggest a pattern, not a frame-by-frame crime, but a slow erosion of care, accompanied by financial bleed. He had been keeping score. Why show me now, I asked, because something in the note had implied purpose, and the folder was answer enough to show that purpose had been long in formation. Because you are the one left in the house, Victor said simply, and because I think you are the only one who will do what is necessary without being seduced by the shape of what we used to be. Barbara Peterson, the neighbor down the hall, Mrs. Peterson, came to my mind, the woman with the immaculate azaleas who always returned my paper cups. I had a mental list of people who disliked Brady's easy smile. None of them, however, were kin. That difference mattered. I don't know if I can do this, I said. The truth was that I did not yet know what this even meant. Stay. Find legal counsel. Confront Elaine and Brady upon their return. Call Mr. Collins. Make a scene. Or stand on a porch while the world heated around me and nothing changed. You can, Victor said, and he sounded older than the years on his face. You can ask the right questions. You can be factual. You can be evidence. You don't have to be a crusader. He paused, as if listening to his own heartbeat. I do not want revenge. I want dignity. Dignity. The word brushed my cheek like an ice cube, sharp and reviving. I thought of the nights when I'd folded laundry alone, reading small print in grief magazines. Of the time Brady had kissed me on the forehead and promised he'd never leave. Of the condo vision board we had taped to the refrigerator with a crooked magnet. I felt bereft and oddly furious, but in the mire of anger there was a tigerish relief. Someone else, an unexpected ally, was awake. Victor was lucid and deliberate. He was not a victim. He had agency. He had documents. The knowledge that he was dying made the stakes immediate in a way that abstractions never could. What's the plan? I asked finally, because the question had to be asked even if I had no idea whether I was volunteering for speaker, witness, accomplice, or simply the person who would have to answer to courthouse clerks. For now, Victor said, we gather. We make nothing theatrical. We collect what exists in plain sight. Statements, receipts, people who will say what they know. We make sure there is no doubt about my wishes when I can no longer speak. We get Patricia to look over the documents. We ask for witnesses who will attest to the neglect and the financial transfers. He said the words with an economy that made the plan sound less like a plot and more like triage. The idea of calling a lawyer felt like biting into something bitter and decisive. It was a grown-up move, and in my life until that morning, I had thought of grown-up moves as late-night conversations and calendar reminders. This felt like stepping onto a narrow ridge with steep drops on either side. If you want me to stay, I said, I'll stay. But I'm not interested in making enemies. I want to be honest. You will not be the enemy if you are honest, he said. You will be the one who tells the truth." Outside, the wind lifted the corner of a plastic bag and sent it skittering like a small animal across the yard. I could hear a lawnmower in the distance. The world hummed on, indifferent to my upheaval. Inside, the house had become a small theater of consequences. The folder between us felt like a detonator. I called Brady once more, this time with the slow, measured composure I resort to when the stakes are public. The voicemail registered as full. He had presumably been in conversations where the phrase vacation and unplugged had been used like charms. I sent a text instead. "Where are you? We need to talk about the bank transfer." 2 dots, then 3. The little signal that someone was reading. That same symbol taunted me, and then a reply came that read only, "See you, son, love you," a heart emoji. It was the kind of shorthand that refuses to confront content. It was infuriating in a way that made breath irregular. I turned the folder over in my hands. There were photographs, dated, annotated, of Victor alone in different rooms, his mail piling, his watch stopped in an image I recognized from last winter. There were check images where Elaine's name appeared as payee, with comments like, "For Mom," scribbled on the back. There were 2 instances where a card had been used in a gas station around the time Brady had booked tickets. The pattern read like erosion, small cuts, water slowly finding the fault line. "Why didn't you lock these away earlier?" I asked, partly accusing, partly curious. I had always assumed that those over 70 would do a different sort of planning. Victor's laugh was soft, almost apologetic. "Because that is not how one's life is arranged. My life was busy. Love is messy. I thought I had more time to sort it. Time, it seems, is the cruelest of accountants." He reached into his cardigan and pulled out a small, dust-smudged envelope containing Mr. Collins's card. Mr. Collins, the bank manager who had known Brady since college. I spoke to him yesterday. He confirmed the transfers. He was surprised by the timing. "Mrs. Peterson?" I asked. "Do you have—" "She will bear witness to what she has seen. She is not a complicated woman. She will say what she has seen. Packages stacking, calls unanswered, and the time Brady laughed like a man at the edge of a dock." The more Victor spoke, the clearer the image became. Not a single act of malice, but an accumulation of choices, each one negligently permitted, each small act multiplying into a gulf. Betrayal was not always a dramatic, face-to-face confession. Sometimes it is a steady neglect that piles up until the fabric is a sieve. A knock came then at the door. Gentle, a neighborly tap. Mrs. Peterson stood there, cheeks flushed with cold, her azaleas a memory in winter. She stepped in without waiting for an invitation, the kind of woman who believes houses are social spaces meant for sharing. "I heard you had family," she said, like someone announcing that she had brought soup. Her eyes, sharp as ever, fell on the envelope. "Oh dear, I heard something on the grapevine." Her presence was a tiny kind of rescue. The house responded by seasoning air with gossip, which in our little neighborhood is close to truth. She reached over to the table and tapped a photograph, then looked at me squarely. "I saw him take packages," she said. "I saw him at the door with bags." "Thank you," I said. Her testimony had the blunt sincerity of a person who rinses dishes with eyesight straight to the point. The folder on the table suddenly felt less like a lottery and more like a ledger of intentions. As the afternoon thinned, Victor told me, in a voice that sought to avoid melodrama, that his life had, for years, been a slow negotiation between pride and need. There were days when Brady had been good to him, kindnesses that were real and complicated, and there had been days when he had been a ghost in the house, present only in the form of bills and an occasional call. Victor's description was not a black and white tale. It was a textured account of human relationships, of favors owed and favors taken. "Do you think he's coming back?" I asked casually. even though the question shouted. I needed to know if the trip was a temporary illusion or a door slammed. Victor's face folded. I don't know what he will do when he gets off that ship. The unknown pulsed like a second heartbeat. I thought about the idea of the return. Brady walking through the door with sunburned cheeks and promises. I imagined confrontations with his mother Elaine, soft, lubricated with excuses. I imagined Patricia, maybe, smoothing things with a professional hand. I imagined police reports, courts, whispers in pews. There is a certain cruelty in having your life upended on a holiday meant for gratitude. Thanksgiving was supposed to be about leftovers and laughter. Mine felt like an interrogation. The rim of the port glass caught the light and made a small, tremulous halo on the table. Victor poured 2 small measures and handed one to me. He did it as if it were a ritual. The gesture had been rehearsed in every housewarming when people tried to establish normalcy between 2 people who shared a home but not a story. To clarity, he said. It was a small toast. We drank. I found myself mindful of the ethical edges of what we were stepping into. Victor was not a child. He was an adult intending to put his affairs in order because he had the power to do so. That agency mattered. It made the choice to involve oneself both weightier and purer. We were not stealing the stage. We were insisting that the stage be acknowledged as a place that exists for more than the whims of the loudest voice. Tonight, Victor said, you can pick a room. You can be here. Sleep if you need to. I will be fine for a night. Why would I stay? I asked, not because I wasn't already leaning toward that strange alliance, but because I needed the question answered in a way that separated principle from pity. Why stay here with you when he has chosen to be absent? He looked at me with an expression that was part apology and part clarity. Because if you leave and let them come back to a house without anyone to notice, he'll never see what they did. Do you want to ruin them? I said. The word ruin is a big one. I had always thought of myself as someone who would not aim to ruin people for sport. Yet here, I considered acts whose moral geometry was blunt and jagged. No, Victor said quietly. I want what is mine to remain mine, and what is yours to remain yours. I want my wishes to be honored. I want dignity. The word dignity returned, echoing like a bell. I realized I had, in some private, stubborn way, always seen myself as someone who would not allow the calls of convenience to rearrange the ethics of a household. The idea of letting them walk through this house and take what they wanted because they had the nerve to call it family made my stomach turn. Tomorrow, Victor continued, we speak to Mr. Collins. We use the key. We check the boxes we need to check. We gather what we can in daylight. We ask Patricia to review the documents. We ask Mrs. Peterson and 2 others to testify if necessary. He said we, as if he had been rehearsing a chorus. The presence of we made some part of me feel both frightened and peculiarly steady. I didn't know if I was prepared for legalese and witness statements and notarized forms. I only knew that the shock of the morning had wandered into something that resembled purpose. A small, secret part of me was moved by the idea of helping an older man create a closing chapter that would not be written by those who cared more for what's in the coffers than what's in the room. Victor was not a story of victimhood. He was an architect of late-life truce. He wanted, as most people do with their last acts, to leave a neatness to the mess they had lived through. I slept on a futon in the guest room that night with the house murmuring around me. During the night, my phone buzzed. Brady's account had posted another story, this one with a longer caption about finding oneself and family who surprises us. The words were like salt rubbed into a raw place. I turned the phone over and let the dark hold it. Before sleep owned me, I opened the folder again and read the index in the dim light. Certain things stuck. Dates, witnesses, a small note in Victor's handwriting that read, "If I cannot, this is what I want." His hand had a tremor when he'd written it. It made the line double. The next morning, the house felt sturdier. I am not sentimental about holidays, but I am susceptible to ritual. I found myself making coffee, folding a dish towel with a precision that felt like armor. Victor read the paper and hummed at the sports scores. He had a quietness that was almost that of a man who had learned certain truths late in life, that time compresses, that relationships are messy, and that dignity is a battle you fight in the small acts of everyday stewardship. He slid the folder across the table again, this time with a section that I had not seen before. A list of names and dates, where he had made small annotations about each. A neighbor who brought meals on a Tuesday in July. A bank clerk who had been present for a transfer in October. A pharmacy that had been used by Elaine in suspicious intervals. There was a carefulness to it that made me respect him and, perversely, made me want to protect him. The man who had once been an afterthought in our life was now the axis of my anger and purpose. When the knock came at the door that afternoon, it was a soft, persistent thing. Patricia introduced herself as an attorney who had handled elder estates for over 20 years. She was not theatrical. She wore simple jewelry and had a slow, calibrated voice that made me feel like a child learning to read out loud for the first time. She looked at the folder and did not flinch. "You've been methodical," she said, "and that's a mercy." For someone trained to parse documents, her assessment was less a compliment and more a confirmation. She asked Victor questions about competency, about whether he had made decisions clear to his physicians. He answered with a lucidity that cut past pity. Patricia nodded, made notes, and said things about notarizations and witness signatures, and the need to ensure that any changes to a will are signed while the person is of sound mind. She didn't dramatize, she legalized. When she asked Victor if he wanted to make any immediate changes to his estate plan, he looked at me and then at the folder. "I want what's fair," he said simply. "I want what has been taken to be returned. I want my wishes, charities I've supported for years, to be protected." "That is achievable," Patricia said, in the same measured tone she had used to praise his paperwork. "It will require signatures and witnesses. Dignity matters as much as the will itself." I had imagined a woman in a power suit, and instead I found a professional who spoke with an evenness that made me feel less like a conspirator and more like someone drawing a line in a ledger. She never once suggested anything sensational. She talked about small, ordinary things, dates, notaries, signatures, and that sober vocabulary turned my panic into a plan. As Patricia left, with phone numbers and an offhand promise to come by again, Victor closed the door and sighed as if a weight had shifted a fraction. "You have to understand," he said. "I am not asking you to become someone you are not. I am not asking you to ruin them. I am asking you to help me make sure the record is accurate." The record. That morning had taught me that the record matters more than intention. People who intend well do not always leave paper trails. People who intend ill sometimes leave receipts by accident. We were living in one of those cases where evidence and will intersected in painfully human ways. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the note Brady had left me and the photos of him laughing on the deck of a ship. The contrast between the two images, the man who could leave and the man who stayed, gnawed at me. There was a kind of theater to it, the way life dramatizes betrayal. I felt foolish and furious and oddly liberated. The man who had once been the axis of my quiet domestic life had shown his true colors with all the grace of a holiday billboard. If you were in my shoes, what would you do? Tell me in the comments. I'd like to know if anyone else has ever chosen to stay when the house felt like a crime scene. But beneath the rhetorical questions and the social media provocations, a deeper decision had already started to align itself inside me. Victor was not asking for a crusade, but he was asking for a witness. The kind of witness that could be called into a courtroom and subpoenaed if necessary. The kind of witness who would not be swayed by a smooth apology when the ship had docked, cheeks sunburned, promises outstretched. There was a comfort in that clarity. Action is not always heroic. Sometimes it is simply the willingness to be the person who remembers what happened. When Brady's return still loomed like a countdown, I could not stop. Victor slid one more thing across the table, a single piece of paper, folded in half, with his handwriting on the outside. Inside was a short statement. If I'm gone, this is what I want. He had written that line twice and underlined it. The ink had bled slightly at the edges, as if written with the pressure of someone building a small bastion against the inevitable. That was the day my life split into an old map and a new one. I had come home for a holiday, expecting the rituals of casseroles and cousins, and instead I found myself holding a file that might someday be used to protect the last wishes of a man I had scarcely noticed until today. The house around us hummed on. Outside, the world did what it always does. Birds flew, engines started, time offered no deference to grief. Victor looked at me, and for the first time, I saw not an in-law or a peripheral figure, but someone who had been shaping a final act with scrupulous care. If you choose to help, he said, it will not be pretty. It will ask for patience, and it will force hard choices. I don't know if I can do hard things, I admitted. You can, he said. You already have. He slid the folder back toward me, and this time when I reached for it, I felt an odd steadiness. The first steps of a plan are never glamorous. They are mostly small choices. Stay or leave. Testify or stay silent. Demand an accounting or let the ledger close unwritten. I set the folder into my lap and felt the weight of other people's choices press against my palms. The edges of the problem had been revealed, but not yet the means by which they would be resolved. The next morning the house moves in a different key. Where yesterday everything felt raw and knotted, today there is a crust of resolve settling over us. Victor's breathing is quieter. The creak of the chair has taken on a metronome quality that measures the hours rather than the days. He makes his coffee with the mechanical care of someone who has learned small rituals or where dignity hides. We'll go to the bank after lunch, he says. The sentence is ordinary. It sounds like an errand, and errands are deceptively tame. I know better. This is the slope down which paper trails are made visible. Patricia arrives just after noon. She has a leather folder that smells faintly of lemon and old paper. She does not do theatrics. She looks at Victor and then at the packet, asking the questions an attorney asks when there is no performance to be had. About dates, about memory, about whether the person before her understands what he's signing. Victor answers each question clearly. There is no fainting. He is, in the measured way that matters to lawyers and judges, lucid. I will need a competency note, she tells him gently, and names a hospice liaison. The word hospice should have felt like an altar bell. Instead, it lands like a fact. Victor nods. He knows the shape of his days. Dignity is, to him, folding the facts into a neat arrangement and asking the people he trusts to hold them steady. We take the key with us. The bank is a small brick building a few blocks away, the sort of place where the manager knows the names of 3 generations of customers. Mr. Collins greets us with the wariness of someone who has spent a life counting other people's trust. When I mention the transfer, his face goes thin. He does not gloat. People who guard other people's money rarely find pleasure in confirming suspicion. 42-3, he repeats, reading it like a confession. He shows us the wire trail on a screen. The dates line up like a simple proof. He tells us, in his precise way, that a transfer of that size is not casual, and that the account holder can usually be reached for verification. We flagged it, he says. When Mrs. Peterson came in and asked questions, it prompted a review. But once the transfer clears, it's difficult to reverse without an order from the courts or the cooperation of the receiving party. He looks at Victor with a softness that is not pity so much as recognition. "I remember when you came in to close your savings book and asked me to explain certificates," he says. "We did the math together. You always kept a tidy ledger. This—" He taps the screen, a small, precise percussion. "This doesn't sit right with me either." There is a moment of logistical clarity that feels almost like mercy. Mr. Collins will notarize a record, make a statement on the bank's letterhead, and place a temporary hold flag in their system pending legal review. He will also provide us copies of the withdrawal receipts and, crucially, the image of the check that was used to authorize the wire. The bank is no champion of personal grievances. It is a machine for records, and our work is, in large part, to make the machine's paperwork speak truth. We return with photocopies that smell faintly of printer ink and possibility. Patricia goes over the folder with the cool, exacting eye of someone who sits on the edge between mercy and procedure. She lists, without judgment, what needs to be done. Witness statements, a medical attestation of competency, a reviewed and signed will, a notary, and documentation of any questionable transfers. Her words are not dramatic. They are the scaffolding of reality. "I won't promise miracles," she says, "but with the documents you already have, Mr. Collins's confirmation, and a clear testamentary document signed while Mr. Hayes is competent and witnessed properly, you will have a solid defense against the sort of casual erasure that would have happened if this had been left unremarked." Her emphasis on competence matters to me more than I expect. In stories, wills are rewritten on a whim. In real life, judges look at dates, at witnesses, at the steady evidence of a mind that knew and chose. Patricia wants to make sure there are no shadows large enough to doubt the light. We assemble witnesses. Mrs. Peterson comes with a list of dates and an ability to recall details like weather. She speaks plainly about packages left on Victor's stoop, whose contents later turned up in another person's car. She tells of calls unanswered, and of the afternoon Brady laughed too loud in the driveway, as if it were a performance. Another neighbor, a nurse who walks in the evenings, offers to write what she's observed. Skin pallor, missed doctor's appointments, an instance when Victor had been left shivering on the porch because the house keys weren't with him. None of these things are dramatic when described alone. They are, as Patricia points out, cumulative. "We need to document a pattern," she says. "Patterns are persuasive. One missed appointment looks like aging, 10 looks like neglect. We do not discuss staging. The only theater we allow is the plain one, arranging photos with dates, collecting the mail logs, taking a picture of the calendar with the day Brady had written vacation, circled in a pen that matches a deposit slip. If there is deception in what follows, it is of a kind that exists only in the gray territory where the vulnerable create a last defense. Victor insists that everything be transparent to the professionals we include. He refuses to be hidden behind sympathy or falsehood. Diane from hospice visits? She is not the sort of person who wears pity. Her uniform is practical, and she has a way of looking at an older person that reads like a résumé of the small things that matter. She does not pronounce a death sentence. She does what a nurse must do: observes, measures, and records. She speaks in the language of function and facts. Questions about memory, about recall, about whether Victor knows the names of his children, the date, his address. He answers each question evenly. She nods and writes something in her pad. "He's consistent," Diane says when she finishes. "He's aware of the situation and his wishes. I will provide a note attesting to his competency for your attorney." Her note becomes a lever. It is not the lever itself, but it supports the weight of what we are attempting to place. A medical professional's attestation does not guarantee all outcomes, but it prevents an easy route of dismissal. It keeps the conversation anchored in the honest fact that Victor is making choices with a mind that knows them. There are small, complicated acts that bruise my conscience when I step across them. James, whom Victor calls a friend from the medical supplies store, brings props, a lightweight oxygen cannula, a hospital blanket, an adjustable pillow. He sets them on a chair, like stage furniture, and refuses to discuss his motives beyond saying, "People listen to sight." The ethical edge shimmers. Patricia sees it, and she restrains the impulse to theatricalize. "Use whatever makes Mr. Hayes comfortable for photographs," she says, with a legalist's refusal to indulge theatrics. But any image we rely on in court must be supported by medical records, witness testimony, and a proper chain of evidence. We're telling the truth we have. We are not manufacturing facts. We create, instead, a careful record of presence. Photographs show Victor reading mail with a pen nearby, dates annotated. We photograph a calendar with his appointments circled. We copy prescription refill slips. We gather images from a neighbor's mailbox camera that show packages arriving and not being collected. If there is an artifice to these images, it is one of composition rather than fabrication. The camera angle, the presence of a clock in frame, the visible date stamp. Patricia keeps steering us back from the edge. "We are curating evidence, not inventing it," she says. At night we sit with Port and his old records. Victor is quieter, the hours weigh on him. He asks about everything as if cataloging is itself a kind of prayer. "Did you find the letter from the bank about the CD? Is there a photocopy of the check to Elaine? Has Mr. Collins written his note?" The questions are small fires. Dealing with them makes the days have purpose. There are tender interludes that keep me from turning wholly toward vigilantism. We read Chandler aloud because Victor likes being read to. A stray scent of peaches returns when he opens a tin of the cookies I brought. He tells me about a girl he wooed in a Navy uniform once, how he loved the sound of her laugh. He tells me things that complicate him, acts of kindness no one else remembers, and mistakes he owns. I see the man who sat in the rocking chair becoming, in the smallest ways, more human to me than he ever had been in the margins of Brady's life. "Why me?" I ask one evening, "because my generosity needs naming." He looks at me with a clarity that makes me feel naked and somehow seen. "Because you're here to notice, because you were the one he left a note to, and because I think you will do something that is less about revenge and more about truce. What we are doing is not pretty. We both know that. We're trying to make sure that the truth is not buried under a neat apology and an Instagram caption. We're trying to ensure that the final measure of Victor's life is not the crude arithmetic of convenience. The days become a loop of calls and appointments. Patricia files paperwork to revise Mr. Hayes's directives, meeting us at a small office to witness signatures and hold a notary's seal. She arranges for 2 independent witnesses, Mrs. Peterson and a neighbor who runs a charity group, to be present when Victor signs the new document that clarifies his wishes. Diane and Patricia are methodical. At one point, Brady posts another story, an image of the ocean and a caption that reads, "Family comes in many forms." The irony of that caption is a salt that doesn't melt. Patricia sees the post. She makes no comment. She keeps doing the work. There is, in these hours, a moral ache that makes us careful about language. We always say wish rather than revenge. We talk about deterring what Victor has already experienced rather than punishing people for being selfish. Patricia says things like, "We are not here to make enemies. We are here to ensure that the record matches the reality." Still, the phrase staging hovers when Diane photographs Victor holding the letter and signing a brief video statement in which he explains in his own words what he wants done with his accounts and his home. The recording is simple. Victor, quiet voice, a short declaration of his wishes, the date clearly visible on his paper calendar behind him. Patricia explains that a recorded statement is not a legal substitute for a signed, witnessed will, but it can be persuasive supporting evidence if there is a contest. It will help the narrative. I feel dirty and relieved in equal measure. People remember faces better than signatures, Patricia says with a dispassionate tone. And judges listen to how someone expresses their wishes, not just to a line on parchment. We are giving them context. When Brady texts, "See you later, love you," the flippancy of it makes my back stiff. Elaine, when contacted by a neighbor, calls but refuses to come home early, saying she has obligations. Her voice, when we hear it in voicemail, is smooth and tinctured with a practiced concern that feels like varnish over a table that's been scratched. There is a moment when she suggests that Victor is simply being dramatic for attention. That line reveals the tilt, self-protective denial dressed as pity. Patricia advises calm. Do not let them draw you into domestic theatrics. Keep to the documents. Admit only what you personally observed. Let the witnesses say what they saw. The plan is not a heist. It is a fortification. We do not entrap, we document. If there is a complicity in our actions, it is a complicity in protecting a man from being erased by those who called him family while treating him as an account. The weeks collapse and compress. Victor's strength slips with a quiet, patient relentlessness. There are days he is sharper, telling a story about a warship's horn he once heard. There are nights when he sleeps with a newspaper folded over his knees. Diane is there often, a practical presence who brings saline swabs and a gentle reprimand for our worst impulses. Once, when I think a protest will rise up in me, Victor takes my hand and says simply, "If it is my time to go, let it be with the things I have chosen." The day he decides to record a final message for Brady, should that be necessary, is a day I will not forget. He sits in his chair, the light tilting across his face like an old map. His hands are thin, but his voice is steady. He speaks to the camera like a man addressing a court of conscience, rather than a tribunal of vengeance. "Brady," he says, and his voice is not cruel, "I have loved the company of both you and your mother. I have not always been easy to care for, and I know I've been a poor steward of my pride. But I have kept certain things that matter to me. I ask that my wishes be respected. If you loved me, do something simple. Help make it right. It is not a trap. It is not a sermon. It is an old man's attempt to speak plainly and to be heard." Later, when Brady returns from his trip and plays the victim of misunderstanding, Victor's words will be the small, indelible truce that undercuts a million smooth excuses. The day Victor dies is both ordinary and seismic. He wakes early and asks for coffee. The sun is low and slanted and makes a pattern on the kitchen floor like the ribs of a cage. We read from a book he loves. He flutters through pages, murmuring the bits he remembers. He eats a biscuit and tells me about a train journey he took once. At one point he looks at me and pats my hand, the same pat he gave the folder the first afternoon we met, and says, "Promise me you'll keep things rightly done." "I promise," I say. Promises in small rooms are heavier than they sound. He sleeps in the afternoon, and when he does not wake from it, it is a passing like falling asleep mid-sentence. There is no dramatics. Diane is calm. She holds his wrist and checks with a competent quiet. He leaves as he lived, without fanfare, with a softness that feels like the closing of a book. Grief is a thing that arrives in contradictory form. There is the immediate animal sorrow and then a narrowed focus, the practicalities of death. Patricia guides us through the first hours. The will is located, the signatures are found, Diane's notes are added to the file. It is work we perform meticulously because sorrow can be soothed, in part, by the fact of a properly folded paper trail. Brady texts, "Call me." Elaine calls, "We need time." The calls feel like a chorus of rehearsed behavior. There is no sense of genuine presence. When Brady finally drives up in a rental car 3 days later, he is sunburned and casual, and asks to see the house for old times. His mother Brenda, Elaine, clutches a handbag and smiles, as though she has been suddenly made the lead in a family melodrama. Patricia advises we let them come to avoid giving the appearance of a trap. Let the record be what it is, she says. We are not to ambush. Let them show their faces. At the memorial, neighbors come. Mrs. Peterson with a casserole dish, the nurse who'd walked at night, Mr. Collins with the bank's letterhead. The house fills with a kind of gentle testimony. People murmur. They cry in a way that reads like remembering rather than spectacle. Victor's cardigan is folded on a chair. His port glass remains half full on the table. We are careful about the small rituals that make death bearable. A hymn, a poem, a friend telling the story of the warship's horn. After the small memorial, Patricia gathers us into the living room and asks to speak with Brady and Elaine privately. They shuffle in with the sheepishness of people who expect tears and also expect the benefit of doubt. Patricia lays out the facts with a professional patience that keeps anger at bay. She speaks of the transfers, of the documented neglect, of Mr. Collins's records, Diane's notes, and the witnesses who saw a pattern. She speaks of the will, its revisions, the signed documents, the witnesses, and the recordings. There is a document Mr. Hayes signed, she says. He directed that certain assets be distributed to charities he supported. He appointed Jade as an executor with a limited defined administrative role. That document was signed in the presence of 2 witnesses and notarized. It is his last clear expression. Brady's face shifts. It is the way a man who has assumed a script will shift when the lines change. There is anger, then bewilderment. We weren't told, he starts, as if the world owes him accelerated compassion. You were told, Patricia says without raising her voice. There is a text dated the day of the transfer. There is a post on social media. The bank has confirmed a wire. The documentation Mr. Hayes prepared names his wishes clearly. Elaine insists that there must be some mistake, that people change their minds, that a son knows best. Her voice frays into the thinness of someone trying to keep a performance afloat. Patricia counters calmly. If you wish to challenge the will, you may do so through the courts. That is your right. But the presence of a competent notarized document signed in the way you would expect to see it will make overturning it difficult, and the bank has already been advised to place certain holds pending investigation. Brady flounders, making the mistake of being theatrical in his pleas. He begs. He blames. He offers a mea culpa too late. When it comes time to read Victor's letter, his final words, Patricia hands me a folded page. My hands shake only slightly as I open it. Victor's handwriting is the same as it was the first day I read his folder. Slow, certain. The letter's a little shaky, but deliberate. He thanks people, names charities, and mentions small things he wants done with his possessions. He writes, candidly, that he is concerned about people who confuse convenience with care. If I cannot manage my affairs, he writes, let them be handled by one who was present with me when I could still speak. After I read, Patricia plays the recorded statement we made with Victor himself, steady and plain. He says much the same things. The room listens. I notice Brady's jaw tighten like someone trying to swallow a stone. Elaine looks as though she will faint, but does not. The legal outcome is not an immediate, cinematic victory. There are letters. There are calls to attorneys. There is the inevitable theater of family lawyers who smell money and begin the choreography of challenges. But because we have done the patient, tedious work, medical attestations, bank records, witness statements, a notarized will, the weight of their paperwork leans toward me and the charities Victor named. Patricia is clear. A contest may unfold, and nothing is guaranteed. But the record is strong. Brady sues for the return of the transferred funds. Elaine cries fraud and weakness exploited. The papers make their rounds through the legal system, and there are days when I am checked and exhausted and the newspapers run with the story like scavengers. My privacy is a thing that erodes. People I didn't know call with opinions. Social media offers kindness and cruelty in equal measure. Mr. Collins testifies about the wire transfer and how it came to his desk flagged as an unusual activity. Mrs. Peterson testifies about packages and missed visits. Diane speaks to competency. Patricia stands between procedure and the public eye, doing the job of translating a messy life into a legal argument. In the weeks that follow, accounts are reviewed. The bank places a temporary freeze while investigations proceed. Some funds, modest but enough to keep me afloat, are accessible in a legal sense because the will, in a provision for a life estate, guarantees me the right to remain in the home for a period and to be provided for in specific ways. Patricia explains it in patient sentences. A life estate, trustee arrangement, and directives to disburse certain assets to named charities. It is not enormous, but it is sufficient, and it carries, in its legal language, the weight of Victor's choices. Brady protests in public, seeking to make me the villain in a story in which he cast himself the victim of circumstance. He files motions, hires lawyers, and speaks in the loud, polished rhythms of someone who has spent time selling charm and deflection. We do not seek to humiliate them. We seek the simple truth. When the court sees the dates, the witnesses, the medical notes, the bank's records, the weight shifts. Elaine's claims that Victor was coerced crumble in the face of a woman, Mrs. Peterson, who remembers him being lucid weeks before he died. The neighbor who runs a charity testifies that Victor regularly made contributions and that his giving had been consistent for years. The judge notes the certified medical attestation that Victor was competent at the time of the signing. There is no dramatic gavel slamming in our favor. There are motions, there are hearings, there are evenings when my chest is a small, tight room. But the posture of the case pulls toward the record we made. The probate judge accepts the will as valid. The bank lifts some of the holds and works with Patricia to untangle accounts. Brady is not arrested. There's no criminal prosecution here, though civil liabilities are assessed. He is required to show the provenance of certain transfers to a civil court. His defense is clumsy. He claims ignorance and then claims charity. The assertions are thin against the ledger. I do not celebrate in ways that make for sensational headlines. Instead, I sit in the kitchen and fold dishcloths, the way I did the week I arrived. There is a quiet goodness in small routines. I closed the door to the room that had been Victor's and breathed the scent of old paper and the faint trace of his cologne. The house is quieter now. The empty rocking chair is a presence that holds 1,000 small memories. Brady and Elaine leave, not with a slam, but with a soft, small packing of entitlement. They take some items, make a few claims, and then go. Their departure doesn't release me precipitously into joy. There is grief. There is a sense of having been used, and of the awkward relief that comes when people you've relied on reveal their true priorities. There are moments that feel like reckoning. A neighbor we didn't know well comes forward to say he'd seen Brady make several large purchases shortly after the wire. Mr. Collins's testimony makes that visible in a ledger. The papers report the case in local columns. People whisper. There are the small private triumphs. A letter from one of Victor's charities thanking us for honoring his wishes. A check from the estate to a community center he supported. One afternoon, after the legal dust has settled into an ordinary kind of quiet, I stand on the porch with the small brass key Victor had given me the first day. It had seemed then like a promise. Now it feels like a hinge. I open the front door and take a slow turn through the rooms. Each corner holds a memory like a book on a shelf. There is sorrow, and there is a curious lightness that is not joy, but is not sorrow either. It is the air that comes after a storm when the wind has settled and there is the possibility of cleaning. At some point, I take the ring off my finger. Brady's band is a worn circle, the metal smoothed by years of ordinary life. I wrap it in a napkin, small, deliberate, and leave it in the middle of the kitchen table the way he left the note, blunt and plain. I write a short paragraph and place it beneath the ring. This is where I leave what was ours. May it find the measure of truth it deserves. It is a gesture that is more about paper and place than about malice. The house is sold in time, the proceeds handled according to Victor's instructions. The charities are notified, the trustees aligned. I move, not far, just down the block to an apartment that feels more like the beginning of a new map than an escape. There is a small joy in learning which cabinet holds the plates, in discovering the sound of mornings without a note left by someone's hand. Financially, my life is secure, in the narrow, respectable way Patricia engineered it. Modest, dignified, enough. Grief never leaves completely. There are nights when I see Victor's hand in mine and think of the port glass catching the light. There are afternoons I look at the calendar and expect to find an appointment penciled in. But alongside the grief is a peculiar sense of reclamation. I return the ring and the keys not in an act of histrionic farewell, but as a tidy closing of a chapter. I mail a letter to Brady, no accusations, just a note that states cold facts and closes doors. I don't want to be part of a drama that triumphs on the broken backs of others. I want to be the steward of what is left to me, to live with the dignity Victor sought. When I walk past the park where Victor once walked, I think of the way he aged with a stubborn dignity that had taken us both by surprise. He was not merely a victim or a villain. He was a man who, in the end, chose a certain clarity and made the laborious arrangements to keep his wishes safe. For that, I feel a gratitude that is tangled with sorrow. There are days when I go back to Mrs. Peterson's porch and bring coffee. We talk about small things, the neighbor's cat, the shape of winter azaleas. On a slow morning, she says something that sticks. "You did right by him," she says, not triumphantly, but like someone stating weather. "You kept watch." That phrase, "kept watch," feels like the truest thing anyone said to me during the whole affair. Watching is not the same as policing. Watching is the act of refusing to let the ordinary crimes of convenience pass without notice. Time smooths the edges. Brady's name shows up in court filings and in a headline now and then. Elaine moves to Florida and sends an occasional postcard. The scandals of a family rarely travel far beyond the people who invented them. The charities Victor loved sent updates. The community center he supported names a small reading room in his honor. I go to the dedication and sit in a folding chair and watch a plaque that reads his name go into the wall. It is a small thing, but it is a real thing. On the first Thanksgiving after Victor's funeral, I make a simple meal. I do not set a place for him. Instead, I make 2 plates, one for a neighbor who has nowhere to go, and one for me. I think of the long drive home I took the year before, the suitcase, the creak of the rocking chair, the note on the kitchen table. I think of the small brass key and the folder that began the whole reasoning of this strange arc. The house I had imagined with Brady, white tiles, a crooked magnet on the fridge, a porch swing with 2 coffee cups in the morning, becomes something else in memory. An exercise in watching, in holding, in making the hard choices that don't look heroic on postcards. I keep the habit of folding dishcloths. I keep a small folder of Victor's letters in a drawer, not out of sentimentality, but out of respect for the man who, finally, asked to have his life honored on his own terms. If you had come to my house that first morning, you would have smelled peaches and the metallic tang of shock. You would have found a note that announced absence as if it were an errand. You might have left. Many people would have. Some stayed. I stayed. And I became someone I was only beginning to know. Someone who could turn the fact of abandonment into a witness. The last time I see Brady, We stand in an empty driveway. He is smaller than I remember, and so is his outrage. There is an apology in his voice that smells of shops closing, slightly perfumed, late, and convenient. I accept it the way one accepts rain on a forecasted day, with the knowledge that it will not wash away the ground beneath my feet. I came home for Thanksgiving and discovered my husband had vanished, leaving me alone with his stepfather. The line remains true. The truth of that morning still lives in me like a bruise and a blessing. In the quiet that follows, I choose small acts of repair. I volunteer at the community center on Saturdays. I keep Victor's folded letters in the drawer and read them sometimes when I want to remember the difference between being loved and being convenient. I make a new list of things I want: a book I will read, a trip I will take for no reason but my own, a little investment in a jar labeled "Together for Me." If there's any lesson to be had, it's that dignity is a thing you can fight for in the small ways, in the decision to stay and witness rather than to leave and allow erasure, in the patient gathering of facts, in the decision to care for the dead as a moral act, not a legal victory. We did not craft a revenge. We kept a promise. If this story moved you, tell me which scene hit you hardest and subscribe for more stories about ordinary people confronting extraordinary betrayals.